So this week we're going to focus in on working on distinct value. We're going to start with a refined drawing and work on manipulating our graphite pencils with value and light. So what I have here started is a value scale. So we're going to work on a value scale and a value gradation. And I also have my varying shades of pencil hardnesses. So I've got an H, a B, 2B, 4B, and an 8 or 9B. And I'm going to have those help me to gauge this value scale as I draw. So I've kind of scribbled here each one of those pencil marks. You can kind of see alone they create these varying grades within themselves. So down here on my chart, I've got a 1/2 inch bar that is 10 inches long, and then I've got a 1 inch bar that is 10 inches long as well. So with this one up above, that's a little bit larger, we want to make what's called a value scale. Notice that I have not drawn any lines to define those specific edges of those squares. I don't want to see lines there, okay? Because part of the challenge is that you have to get that value within itself, the way you've shaded it or created it, have a line within itself without actually drawing a line. So the first way to do it, the best way to do it, is to start by those two ends, like the lightest value and the darkest. So the lightest light is going to be the white of your paper, and the darkest dark is going to be your richest, darkest pencil that you press quite strongly with. So you can use the sort of side of the pencil. And then the other thing that I'm going to play around with is starting to work with these blending stumps that I have. And so what you can do with the pencil is get that to look like a nice, just smooth, unmodulated area of tone. So you can take those bits of graphite that are kind of loose on the page there and blend them together to make a nice, rich, dark, deep black with that greasiest pencil that you have. If you don't make the edges perfect, that's fine. We can go back with the eraser a little bit later and clean it up. I'm making a little bit more effort with that on this darkest color because it's a little bit harder to erase. Okay, so there's the darkest dark and the lightest light. The next way to go about this is to then try to get your gauge of what the 50% gray tone would be. So take a look at your pencils, and that might be best done with the 2B pencil. So I also have my pencil sharpener nearby. I like these metal pencil sharpeners because they don't eat away at my pencil too quickly, because we all know that drawing pencils aren't necessarily cheap, right? There's also ones that come in the canister, which you may have, but this is just what I have handy right now. Okay, so find your midpoint range. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I might try, this portion here. So try to get it as middle gray as you think you can. So I'm going to just try to go with an up and down motion, and then I'll clean up the edges with my eraser after so that I can get a nice smooth effect with the pencil. And then go back to my blending stump and see how I can get that texture to look nice and smooth. You can also try to even out, you know, a value using your eraser if it looks like it's too varied, because the whole goal is to try to make sure that that looks like one distinct value there. On the further end, I'm going to use the H pencil, which is harder and lighter, as I talked about. Try to get that really nice light value in there. Make sure I'm able to exercise some control when I'm doing my drawing. You know, you might use a combination of the stump and your fingers and even the eraser itself. So now that I'm closing in on my middle gray, I'm thinking that maybe I have produced it just a little bit too dark, since I have more ability to go in between here than I have in between there. So here you can see the results of my value scale. I had to work pretty hard going back and forth with using the eraser and the stump, blending stump. And so now what I'm going to do is just clean up the edges. So you can see I've kind of went beyond the area of that 1-inch strip. So I'm going to put a ruler down, or I could do this with a piece of paper as well, and then just erase to sharpen up that edge. So you can see there, now it's a nice clean edge. I can flip the paper to the other side and then do the same thing. And I can show you how you can do it with a piece of paper as well. So I'll just put that alignment up there and erase along there. And now I have a nice and clean and well-defined, distinct set of values here. So look carefully how you can see very distinct squares across this value scale without me actually putting a line there. It's the difference in the value that defines that square. So the next thing we're going to do is this little strip down below, and do it as sort of a gradation scale. So we did the value scale with the individual values first on purpose, so that when we get to doing this gradation scale, which is more gradual, that we're making sure that we address all of those values that we want. And for some of you, you might be frustrated with trying to do this. It does take a bit of time, but it's definitely a worthy thing to try and do, because what will help you with is that it'll allow you to have a lot more sensitivity and control when we get to drawing these objects, which is what we're going to be doing next. So you can see here, I'm just kind of going across, trying to mimic those values that I have up above it, switching out, you know, 9B, 8B, 4B to 2B, and down across my hardnesses of pencils to give me also an understanding of how they can work for me. And then every now and then I can go across, you know, with my blending stump and work on getting it to be a smooth transition. For the upper part of the drawing, I'm going to work on focusing on these categories of light. As I had mentioned before, there's 6 categories, and you can see them really nicely on something like the form of an egg. If you don't have an egg, you could try utilizing like a ping pong ball. Something that is white and round is best. So I've got my different grades of pencils, my blending stumps, my, pencil sharpener next to me here. And also my value scale to help me reference to make sure that I'm getting that full value range as I'm producing this drawing. So my hand doesn't smear this. I'm going to put a piece of paper down on top of it, and I can lift it up now and then just to gauge how my drawing is going. So, like I had mentioned before, I always start a drawing with a rough kind of gesture, just to figure out my composition, how things are going to lay across the page. I've got these 4 eggs that I think first I'm going to work to more dramatically light. There, that looks a little bit better. Let me see how it is with different types of lighting. So this is something you should play with at home as well. What you can do to get the most dramatic lighting so that you're able to really see those different values across the edge of your eggs. I kind of like this, so I'm going to go with that. And you can already see there, how nicely that reflected edge is happening there. I'm going to start by deciding kind of how big I want the eggs to be and just get a rough sense of them across the page. They're sort of in a line, but not exactly. As you can see, I'm always, using my drawing implement, my drawing tool, to help me gauge proportion and scale. I hold the drawing up, compare spaces between things, and measure, the height versus the length of something to make sure that I'm going to get it right in space. I think with these, I'm going to focus kind of more 1 egg at a time, just so that I can really think about what I'm doing with the value. So I'll start with one more in the center here, or on this side here, so that you can see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. The funny thing is that when I first put these eggs down, that they were just like totally rolling all over the place, driving me crazy. I was very compelled to make the eggs break. Okay, so now I've got an outer edge. See if you can remember what those 6 categories of light are that I was talking about. And as I draw them, let's see if we can make them recognizable. That would be the goal for this drawing. So I'm starting with the lightest H pencil until I get an idea of how those values are going to develop. And then I also want to get that shadow of the egg on the surface of the table. And as I go, I'm going to be switching pencils, sharpening now and then also using my blending stump a bit. So this drawing is much more about control, seeing what you can do with these drawing tools and refining your abilities with creating subtle value tones and a tonal range. So the blending stumps are quite nice because I can really just push around the graphite that's already there on the paper to make sure that I'm not going to push it into a value that it isn't as I see it. working across the forms of the other eggs, really focusing on getting this skill down so that I'm able to see those full values as they are on an object. The most important thing that I have found is that that bit of reflected light at the edge is super key in getting across when you have a dramatic lighting situation. It's the one thing that really gives an element volume and form. So whenever you're drawing even any subject matter besides the eggs, this is something to really look for, because if for some reason, if the value goes straight up to the edge, even though it has value, it still appears quite flat, because most elements do have that bit of reflected light. So did you remember all of the 6 categories of light that I mentioned in the lecture previously? So you have the highlights there, you have a light area, then you have the shadow, and then you have the core of the shadow, a little bit of a darker area through there, and then you have the reflected light, and then you have the cast shadow. So this is what I'm going to be looking for in your drawings. So see what you can do to look carefully at those eggs that you're drawing to make sure that you can see those distinct differences in your values. And so as I'm drawing, you can see me going back and forth between using the blending stump, the pencil, the eraser, maybe different grades of pencils, the harder pencil versus the greasier, darker pencil, until I come across the effect that I want to get. So it's really worth it to take the time to get this down. You know, sit down and find your meditative space where you can really focus on observing what you see. And I come back with the eraser, carve out a bit of highlight, and I'm also putting my hand down on the paper here so I don't end up smearing the other eggs that I'm going to be drawing. Thank you all for joining me on this demo on categories of light. So hey, now we might call ourselves something of an egghead, haha. And I hope that you will return again for my next demo on drawing and also value. Bye!